Hello there, everyone, and welcome to this panel on the psychology of Final Fantasy VII, looking at trauma and recovery. PAX, how are we? That was all right, but can we go again? PAX, how are we? It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today to talk about this, arguably one of the best games ever. And it's a pleasure to be moderating it. In wanting to create this panel, I reached out to the best, brightest, and most informed people to join me on it. Unfortunately, they weren't available, so we've got what we've got. Well, it's, we'll go through it. My name is Christopher Leech. I'm a PhD psychology researcher over in England, hence the strange accent, over in Liverpool. So if you know what I mean, kidda. So if I say anything funny, apologies. My research is in mental health and video games. So, you can kind of see the resonance here and like what games can kind of teach us about certain things, about psychology. I'm going to now ask the panel to introduce themselves, give you their pronouns and a little bit about what they do, and then also, without context, their go-to party. My pronouns are he, him, by the way, I forgot to mention that. And my go-to would be Cloud, Barrett, and Red 13. I'm going to start over this end, and then we'll go across.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Celeste Sangiorgio. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a clinical psychologist, postdoctoral clinical psychology at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. Nice. Hell yeah. And I focus on both practice and research as a clinical psychologist. And my research is on gamifying different clinical skills, so picking up coping skills through digital media. We have a therapy platform that we're working on, as well as like an oxycodone VR game that teaches people how to recognize the signs of oxycodone overdose and how to intervene effectively. So those are some examples. And my go-to party is Tifa, Cloud, and Barrett for narrative cohesion.
I said no context, no context.
Oh, sorry, no context, just because.
Classic party, yeah. Fine choice. Hi everyone, I am Dr. Rachel Kowert. I am the research director for Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit that serves the gaming industry and gaming community. We run the AFK room here, which is right up the hall. If you haven't checked it out, you should, I guess tomorrow, because it's probably closed now. It's the quietest room in the con by design. It's a great place to go. Just take a load off, do some coloring, and have a quieter space away from the hustle and bustle of the show floor. I have studied games and gamers for more than 10 years with a focus on the way that games impact us physically, socially, psychologically. My go-to party is Cloud Yuffie Vincent. We can meet up later.
Like it.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Creveling. I go by Crev. I'm a part-time content creator and Final Fantasy fan. I am actually not in the world of psychology, but I've beaten and played the game about 100 times. And it is one of my favorite games, as you guys can probably tell. My pronouns are she, her, and I do a lot of work within the streaming community to help with disability and mental health awareness. So I'm really excited to be able to join these amazing panelists and kind of talk about it from a content creator and a player's point of view. Oh, and my preferred team, I have two. So I do Cloud, Aerith until literally the inevitable, and Red 13. And then after that, I usually do Cloud, Sid, and Red 13.
Ooh,
Gone but not forgotten, am I right?
I'm sorry?
Gone but not forgotten.
Correct, yes.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Amelia Herbst. Pronouns are she, her. I am a postdoctoral fellow and therapeutic game master at Game to Grow. To give you a little bit of context on Game to Grow if you haven't heard of them, we are a 501c3 based out of Seattle, Washington. We believe in using games of all kind for therapeutic, educational, and community growth. One of the things that I do is I am predominantly an individual therapist, which means I play video games with a lot of my clients, and I don't care how old you are. Let me tell you something, it is really fun to play, Destiny with a 32-year-old and talk about how stressful work is. Like, come on, like, who wouldn't want to do that? Yes. Let's see, my go-to team. I'd have to say probably Cloud, Tifa, and Vincent.
Lot of Tifa fans on the panel, okay. Now, before we get sort of into the nitty-gritty, all our information is on there. Do please get in touch. We are big fans of fans, I guess. But there's something I really want to stress. We are going to be talking about trauma and recovery. So there might be a lot of subjects that are present in the game that may resonate with people, may cause a lot of emotional response. So if you need to take some time for you, do that. Like, if you need to leave, do that. That's totally okay. It's fine. These games are very emotional and very impactful for all various reasons. We are going to have some questions towards the end, but this is not the space for sharing. While sharing is indeed caring, this is not the venue for it. So, I'll feel a little bit more about the questions when we get there, but should end in a question mark, and let's keep it really enjoyable for everyone. Okay. My first question then, it's been the 25th anniversary of the game. It is, you could almost describe seminal in what it has done for JRPGs in the West and for how important it is. But what I'd like to ask each of my panelists is, when did you first play Final Fantasy VII, and what did you think of it at the time? Start over here.
So I believe I first played it in, I think, 1997, when I was 7 years old. It was the first RPG that I ever played. I played Zelda, but I feel like that's very puzzle-based, whereas this was a long-form narrative. And yeah, absolutely wonderful experience. It took me so long to beat as a young person. I think I was just talking about this. I got stuck in the Shinra headquarters right after the attack, just because I couldn't find a door. I just couldn't find it. I was stuck there for 6 months. So started when I was 7 in 1997, finished when I was 9.
You couldn't just Google it back then
No,
and figure out
you
where to
had to
go.
ask the guy at the game shop.
Back in our day.
Yes, back in my day. I definitely played it right when it came out. I pride myself on having played all the Final Fantasies right when they come out. It's my favorite franchise ever. I remember, though, when 7 came out, it was distinctly different from all the ones that came before it, because those little graphics that look funny now were revolutionary at the time, and I just remember being like, my mind is blown by the graphics and broody cloud of Final Fantasy VII. So yeah, it still holds a very special memory in my heart.
So I played it probably about a year or so after it came out. We got it for Christmas in 1998. I was about 8 years old at the time, and it didn't even come to me. It went to my older siblings. And I remember my sister playing it, and I watched her play through it, and I basically took the game from her, and she never saw it again. But at 8 years old, I didn't understand a whole lot, so I just loved watching it. It was such a different type of game watching my siblings play it. So it was just kind of new and exciting, and there was all these really just big advancements in the game itself, watching them play the older Final Fantasy pixel games and such like that too. So just kind of the graphics and the very beginning of just everything that was so exciting about it is what drew me into it for sure.
So I'm a bit of a late adopter. I started playing it, I think, in the mid-2000s because my best friend from middle school really liked it. And I remember going, I'll try it. And then I had a bad toxic relationship with villains in lots of games, and I thought Sephiroth was the bomb.com. So I was instantly sold. I was like, yes, give this to me. But I actually played it, and the more I played it and the more in-depth it got, the more I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that I don't feel like I was seeing in video games at that time, or at least the games that I was playing. So my poor best friend had me get on the bus every day and go, okay, so I just got through this section. I'm kind of a little stuck, but do you remember when X, Y, and Z thing? And he's like not even awake because it's like the 8th grade and no one wants to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think for me, just the story was so profound.
I mean, I'm just going to throw a little flex at y'all, because we had the international version over in Europe, so like I was able to beat the weapons and stuff that you didn't have. I should have also said as well, we're not going to be talking about the remake, because I think it's still respectful of people picking that up, but we are going to go a little bit into compilation, so like Dirge, Crisis Core, all that sort of stuff, just because, why? There's so much delectables to enjoy, you know?
Can we skip Dirge of Cerberus, though?
No.
Not if you're a Vincent fan, not if you're a Vincent fan.
Come on.
Like, so my sort of first question for you in the panel is, while there are so many prominent themes and sort of really impactful moments, particularly around sort of, in my experience, like grief and loss, and my experience of playing it as a younger person and a slightly more, cognitive developed person, really changed. So what were some of the themes that really spoke to you? And Rachel, I'd like to start with you.
Eris, oh gosh, I can still viscerally feel that moment when the basket of flowers drops. It was really groundbreaking in storytelling. As Amelia was talking, Final Fantasy was so ahead of its time in this kind of narrative storytelling, and especially the death of a primary character at such a pivotal moment in the game. And I think for me, I know there's a lot of other things that these panelists are going to talk about, but for me that is like the defining moment, not only of Final Fantasy VII, but I think of Final Fantasy as a franchise, and I tend to talk about 6 a lot, and in terms of the franchise, but like that is the moment in 7 that I think is just defining for all of Final Fantasy.
I mean, did you all know that if you sit in the submarine for 48 hours straight, you can bring Aerith back on disc 3?
Can't give away the game hacks yet.
Sorry. Quick show of hands though, who fought Genova Life without tears in their eyes? Anyone? Okay, good. That's the right response. Celeste.
So you're saying the most
impactful theme.
Impactful. I think, especially playing it as such a young person, Tifa's character throughout was very formative for me. I went on to do karate and compete in MMA, and I think that was probably pretty helpful in putting me on that career path, that and Sailor Moon. But yeah, so those two things formed strong internalized schemas for me. And in replaying Final Fantasy VII to prepare for this panel, I was really struck by Tifa's resilience and how it's framed in the context of her actively communicating with people when traumatic events happen. She does attempt to talk to people about it, whether or not people respond to that. She is initiating that communication and attempting to process. And then I think if you want, you can check. I just tweeted about it, but she really guides Cloud in processing in the live stream too, which I can talk about later for sure.
Spoilers. Let's go this side.
Next. Okay. So mine has changed quite a bit. So when I first started playing, I was obviously 8 or 9 years old. I didn't really understand the overall themes of what was going on in the game. But one of the things that first drove me into it was I saw myself in a video game for the first time. As you can tell, I look like one of the characters. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. She's really cool. And then I realized just kind of the arc of how the characters were built and how these strong female characters were developed. Tifa, Aerith. I mean, Aerith, we all know what happens, but looking at the process of the development that she went through from that time, and we met her in the slums to the time of her death. And then also Tifa, very similar to the last answer essentially, was just that, she went through this entire breakup of everything that she knew was wrong, and she rebuilt herself, and she still was resilient with it. And in a time in, the late 90s, we saw mostly men in those roles. So we're seeing these strong female characters that give us such a role model, or just like realizing that like it's okay for us to be resilient as well. So that was kind of my first initial thought process. And then later on, a couple of years later, I lost my mother. And I actually played through the game to feel connected and feel that like I wasn't alone going through loss. It was very, very tough for me. I was very close with my mother. She lost a battle to cancer. And I remember just replaying the game over and over and over and seeing how it affected everybody else and realized that I was not alone in what I was feeling. That's it.
I have to take a moment to soak that in. I'm so sorry. I think for me, one of the most, I don't know if it hit me as hard when I played it for the first time, but I definitely know the remake kind of brought this around. But after they bombed the Mako reactor and then they head down to the slums, seeing the difference in poverty level was just insane to me. And like thinking about like, you know, a lot of the work that I do is to help some underprivileged populations. So kind of to see like how drastic that change is between the people living their lives up there and kind of taking advantage of the system that Shinra put into place, and then everyone down below that's just fighting to survive. I think that's something that's really hit, and I think something that I still think about like on a day-to-day basis, you know, especially looking at our own society and the people that we're trying to help.
Capitalism is the real bad guy, is what I'm hearing, and I totally agree. Yes, right?
That part was it was such an interesting way to see that, because it was there in the old game, but when they brought it through with the remake, it was just on such a deeper level, and I was like, oh gosh, and it just like, I remember it hit hard, and I was just like, you can really see, like you can see the difference of people. They really did a good job, I think, kind of separating it and showing us that like these people are not living the same at all.
So Lisa and Celeste, you kind of already touched on this, but I'd like Rachel and Amelia to sort of just say, is there a character that perhaps like best represents you, or whose journey sort of really spoke to you, like on a individual character level? Rachel, you want to go?
He's pointing to me because I told him what I was going to say.
It's great.
I don't want to say it now. Cloud, broody Cloud. He's got blonde hair. He's got good one-liners. He's brooding around. I mean, I was like 13. I wasn't 6 or 7 when this came out, and he absolutely resonated with
Let's
me
mosey.
Still today.
Let's mosey.
Let's mosey. Yes.
I think so. Which is why I said no, we're talking about Dirge of Cerberus. Vincent actually is the character. I like really got into it. Okay, once again, toxic characters. I think he's very healthy after a while. Let me step that back for those of you that love him as much as I do. But even like playing Dirge of Cerberus and even watching it again recently as I was refreshing for this and being like, wow, that dude's been through so much. And then kind of almost the rebirthing process with him. It's amazing.
Okay, excellent. So it's fair to say that this game means so much to so many people that, you know, you wouldn't be here if it didn't mean something to you, right? Maybe you try like psychology, I know I do. But the game changed the world, right? That's not an understatement in any way. So my next question is, what do you think is the legacy of Final Fantasy VII, and where do you think that's kind of brought us at this point, sort of up to the remake, effectively? Let's start down this end.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
The legacy.
The legacy of the game.
How many of us were really excited knowing it was getting remade and we were going to see it in all new graphics and it didn't matter? Yeah. I think because those of us, especially those of us that the story touched our hearts, for those of us that played through it 100 times, for those of us that, you know, did fan art and had it in our brains, for those of us that watched Advent Children, for those of us that wanted so much more out of this series, like I don't think that I personally can't think of a game that has really touched so many people that deeply. And I think that its story, its characters, like what it's brought to us going through our own loss and going through the loss of these characters and watching rebirth of characters that we thought were cold or dark. There's not many games I can think of that does that.
That's a really good answer. I was like thinking of my answer. I think for me, the legacy of Final Fantasy is, at least Final Fantasy VII, is vulnerability. It's such a story of you have literally been dealt the worst cards that you can possibly do, but you still have to push forward. So it made mental health real. And not a lot of games do that. And it was really just kind of eye-opening, just being able to see, like, they're dealing with death, they're dealing with PTSD, they're dealing with memory loss. These are all things that people deal with. And as I grew up and kind of experienced some of those own things myself, I just even, like, more, I just kept, like, pulling myself into it and seeing, like, myself in it. Even if it wasn't that specific character, I could see myself in the situation. And so just the vulnerability of everything and of the whole game really just spoke to me. And that's kind of where I see the legacy going.
I think that Final Fantasy VII was special in the sense that it brought JRPGs kind of out of a niche. Like, I mean, I love JRPGs as a genre, but not everybody knew it and was familiar with it. And I think that 7 is really the one that propelled it into the mainstream. And I know we're not supposed to talk about the remake, but I'm only like 10, 15 hours into the remake, and I feel like the legacy of the remake is, one, that it's only half a game, and two, Chadley, because I can't get him out of my mind.
Oh, Chadley is our boy. Let's go.
You know.
Well, yeah, to pretty much like agree and build off, I think like at the time that Final Fantasy VII came out, it was like the time of heavy narratives in games. Like I played Legend of Legia, I think that was around the same time, like Wild Arms 3, like all those games that like had really intense plots. And Final Fantasy VII kind of rose to the surface, and I think it made, and not all of it ages well. There are some slurs, and often people respond to Cloud by telling him to like man up when he's upset, so not the best way to respond to someone who's traumatized. But I think that content is something that became a legacy, and I was actually struck by how similar, when I replayed it, it is to like Mass Effect, the whole Mass Effect series. You walk around the Highwind, you walk around the Normandy, you romance your like team, so I think that legacy it's right there, you can see it, at least if you're me, I see it.
Okay, that's excellent. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, and I think one of the big parts of the game is not just like bad things happening to characters, but like every time the characters are faced with a challenge, there is, sometimes you have to work it out. I'm thinking of Vincent, and Yuffie particularly, but they do engage in some form of recovery. I think it's one of the best moments, but after Cloud's come back out the live stream and they're in the Highwind, and he says, I've not been myself, and I'm really sorry about that, but now I'm here and I'm back, I'm ready to do the thing. And the music cue comes in, and then you could all say it with me, then they all say, there ain't no getting off of this train that we're on. That just hits so hard in my soul. So to phrase that into a question, because that was a comment, an example for later, what not to do, is do you think there is a practical application for the game to actually sort of teach us about some of these things? And Amelia, I'm going to lean into you first because you do the therapy thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Why Vincent's one of my favorite characters, and honestly a reason why I bring him up to Final Fantasy fans that have gone through trauma, is how much it hurts to hear him refer to his trauma as his sins. Think about the fact that this is a guy that was just trying to protect somebody that he really cared about, who was trying to stop something that he thought was unjust, and had something done to him. And because that thing was done to him, he walked around saying he was paying for his sins. And how many people with trauma feel like that sometimes they were put in situations because they did something wrong, or something happened to them because something was wrong with them? And then we go through Dirge of Cerberus, and towards the end, he has this choice between choosing chaos and fully forming into the chaos, or by tapping into chaos's powers and working through it. What a beautiful example of have people that really sit with trauma and are ready to just be like, whatever, like this is my life now, and people that are like able to like sit and hold that trauma and go, you know what? I'm going to sit here with it, and I'm going to hold it, I'm going to go through it, and then end up so much stronger on the other side of it. That's exactly what Vincent does. So what a beautiful narrative to show like somebody that went, these are my sins, I am carrying this is because of something that I did, to work their way through this really complex system, facing their abusers, facing stuff that they've gone through, to come out on the other side and to smile at the end of it.
That's a really good answer. Sorry. Yes. So for me, I think that the thing that spoke to me the most in terms of recovery is I actually cracked my skull in 2010, so I experienced a bit of memory loss myself. I had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. So I struggle with remembering a lot of things, and one of the things that I remember just replaying Final Fantasy VII 1,000 times was when Tifa was walking through Cloud in the live stream and saying, she like grounded him and was like, this is what we're doing, this is what's real. Let's talk through this. Let's realize what is real and what is fake and kind of merge those together. And that was just something that has helped me over the years because like, I'll wake up and I forget something. And then I like remember like, okay, let's take a step back. Let me ground. Let me figure out where I am. Let me figure out what's real, what's in front of me. And then process of elimination going through that. So that live stream section really spoke to me just on a personal level, just because I didn't realize it until several years later. This was, 20 years or 10 years after I played the game the first time. The game is so powerful because every time I play it, I get something else from it. And it adapts to what's going on in my current life too. So as far as recovery and just like the pinnacle for me, it was the Tifa and Cloud live stream moment of just like, this is real. I promise you, like, you are okay. I am here and we're gonna walk through this together.
And then to get like really nerdy, because I've read On the Way to a Smile, you then have to add in like that it was Aerith that protected them through the live stream, and I'm like, whoa!
Spoilers!
Like, we said compilation, it's all there. Celeste, I think you have something to say about the live stream?
I think, if you've been to therapy, the first thing that happens when you do anything in therapy is psychoeducation, right? You respect the patient's dignity by explaining what's happening. And I think that psychoeducation can really grow when there's a foundation that is already working from, a familiarity. And I think that scene in the live stream can provide some familiarity for like what imaginal exposure therapy looks like for trauma, which is someone walking through each component of what happened during a traumatic event and processing it with that person. So what were you feeling at the time? What were you thinking? And then even restructuring some of their beliefs. And I think there's a really powerful part in that process with Tifa and Cloud, where she even challenges some of the things that Sephiroth has kind of like gaslit Cloud about and like fed him to believe about himself. And she pulls it out and like challenges it right there. And it's just a great like foundation and exposure to something that is fairly similar to what it looks like in therapy. I mean, you don't go into the live stream, but you do talk through things and you imagine them.
If you offered that service.
Right. VR will get there.
You have a point. And I think all of these experiences that these panelists are discussing, the reason it can be so powerful is because it's modeling these behaviors. And we talk about the storytelling of Final Fantasy and how ahead of the time it is. It doesn't just lean into like, everyone's traumatized, play the game. But it shows you ways that you can overcome the trauma and then be resilient. And, symbolic models, which is what we call people in film and characters in games, they're actually some of our earliest teachers, and we can learn a lot from actively playing through these narratives and taking these skills like reflection and not the man up part, but the reflection and bringing it into our day-to-day lives.
I agree, and I did want to also say, I know we've talked about different people's traumatic responses. I think just the like wealth of them, and not everyone who experiences trauma or traumatic event develops a post-traumatic disorder or a psychopathological response. And so Tifa, like I said, is someone who's fairly resilient. I wanted to also mention Barrett. I think he's such a good representation of post-traumatic growth. He starts in such like an angry place, and he really loses hope, and is very like, his beliefs about himself shift until he's in a place where he like kind of releases his control over what will happen, and through doing that, commits to having control over his own reactions in the present moment, which is definitely something that could be one of those internal working models.
Mm-hmm. So I'm also just going to point out no one's showing enough love to my boy Nanaki, like Red 13, like, because that moment in Cosmo Canyon, after the scariest boss ever, you all know what I'm talking about, that's Nightmare Fuel. Oh my days, the howling.
That fight traumatized me.
Oh yeah, same.
I had to beat it I think the first time I went through it, I had to beat it, or I had to retry it like 6 or 7 times because it just like couldn't get it.
And the pro tip, just X potion, one shot,
he
easy money.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd like to sort of dive into a little bit there is when I think of Final Fantasy VII, I think of community, and I think of as when you take a single-player game that you can go on this wonderful nigh on 100-hour journey, how it has the ability to bring people together. And I think, Lisa, if we can sort of go to you as like a streamer and someone in that sort of context of like bringing people together in that hub to share an experience.
Absolutely. So one of the biggest reasons on why I got into content creation in the first place was because I streamed Final Fantasy VII as my first game, and I wanted to meet other people. I was living in a new city. I didn't know anybody, so I was like, why not? Let's try it. So I started streaming Final Fantasy VII from this like crappy little laptop I had, and I had like 2 viewers coming in, and they're like, I love this part. And then we would just talk about it while I was going through the game. And it just slowly became this thing where like, I realized that when I went live and talked about things that I loved, other people would come in and do the same. And it just kind of grew from there. And honestly, I've been content creating since 2015, and that's kind of adapted through all sorts of Final Fantasy titles. I predominantly do Final Fantasy XIV mostly. And it's been such a cool experience because I meet people of all walks of life through it, sharing their favorite games, their favorite moments. And we can all kind of talk about it together, and especially when it comes to like talking about Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy XIV, they're very mental health obviously driven topics, and I pride myself in being able to be a space where people can come in and tell me if they're having a bad day. When I ask you how you're doing, I want you to tell me, if you're comfortable sharing, of course. Like I want to be able to build that space where people don't feel like they have to say, I'm fine, and then that's it. Like I want them to be able to come in and talk and experience it, and I think that game kind of opens the door to allow us to do that. And it gives us kind of that community building of, this is why we love this game, so let's talk about it and let's be real about it.
Rachel, I'd kind of like to lean into your expertise about sort of like social psychology and sort of like maybe sort of like more sort of researchical, if that's a word.
Researchical.
Researchical.
It's the first I've heard it.
But like what does the science say around like the way people are sort of brought together by games and sort of interact in that social arena?
You know, a shared playful activity brings us together like no other experience. And I think the magic in Final Fantasy VII, we see it here in the longevity. We're still talking about it. They actually remade it like properly-ish. But I think it's because it all resonates with us. You know, there's a character for everyone, and there's an aspect of the story that we can all relate to and we can all talk about. And I can say, oh, Celeste, Cloud, and she can be like, oh, Tifa. And we can have that shared experience and talk about us and ourselves and maybe what we're going through the stories that we're experiencing, which makes it feel a little bit safer, I would say.
So, I mean, like, you know, like Sid, he's there trying to do science and gets his funding pulled.
I relate.
Yeah, big feels. Like, and you could say that's like maybe like minor compared to maybe some of the other characters, but it's still really important. Like when he actually gets into that and you get that moment, you're like, oh, wow, like this actually meant a lot to him personally, right?
I identified with that part this playthrough.
I was going to say, if you asked me who my favorite Final Fantasy character was, it's obviously Sid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, we're going to get a little bit granular now. Something we were talking about a little bit before. But one of the big things that people always sort of ask, and I've had this sort of like when playing the game on stream myself, is that, you know, why doesn't Tifa mention to Cloud about the thing? And it's like, well, actually, Tifa goes through a lot of physical trauma, especially with Sephiroth during the Nibelheim incident. And a lot of people kind of maybe don't go into this too much, but like she does physically see Cloud because he goes in and he does the business, right? So it's always debated, why didn't she mention it? And I think it's because she did see him, but memory gets muddled because brains don't deal well with like everything else, right? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we were having a fun conversation before on, there are studies on things that can enter your perception but not your awareness. So if you're shown images in rapid succession for just just microseconds, your brain will react to the image, but if someone asks you, you won't know that you saw it, right? And so that's kind of similar to if you have a head injury, she could know that she perceived, like it's in her perception that she saw him, but not in her conscious memory. Mm-hmm. So very, very exciting conversation.
These are the things we talk about at the Westin in the evening.
You just love Final Fantasy, right? And how does that kind of, do you think that marries up in any way to the way that people maybe will engage in therapeutic like activities, like in sort of relation to injury and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about injury and when we think about even like loss and coming into treatment, sometimes things aren't mentioned because we think that it's things that we're just dealing with and we don't understand what they are. So Tifa might not have seen it. Like Celeste has an excellent point there. But what if she did, and what if she was just like, I'm just seeing things, you know? It's almost kind of like when we go through our own personal loss. When we go through our own personal loss and we're like, did I hear that person? You know, this person calls me every Sunday, and I swore I heard the phone ring, but I know they've been gone for 2 months. So it's almost encouraging, you know, what are the weird little things that you're experiencing that you don't want to tell anyone else because it's weird. Or even for those folks that are more open about that stuff, like I swore I saw grandma walking through the kitchen. You know, I'm not going to tell anyone else that because, you know, people believe in ghosts and spirits and our people stay with us sometimes, and that's awesome. But I don't want to freak out mom because I don't want her to be like, what? What's happening? So it's all about just realizing that sometimes we do see things, we do experience things, we do have things that don't necessarily make any sense to us, but what's the point of bringing anyone else into it if we believe it's just us?
Any other thoughts on that, anyone? No? Okay. Let's sort of turn our gaze then, not from the heroes, but to the villains. Sephiroth, right? How wrong was he, though? Because I'm not going to lie, if I found out I was some part of a genetic experiment, I wouldn't take that well either. Like, I'm not saying what he did was right, but that's a pretty shocking revelation to just try and deal with on a casual evening in town, right? Mm-hmm. So the villains, how are they understood, misunderstood? Any thoughts on this?
So in preparing for this panel, I definitely went through each character's trauma, prior to the events of the plot as well as within the course of the narrative. And Sephiroth was absolutely one of them. I think it's quite shocking to think that your life was one thing and then suddenly, in a very surprising way, find out that it very much so was not what you thought it was. And again, there are many different ways that people can react to different things that happen to them. For Sephiroth, it was so horrifying that it completely alienated him from his sense of self, which is something that we see with like very extreme trauma responses. People feel like they can't trust their emotions, they can't trust their thoughts, so much so that they don't even see them as internal to themselves anymore. And in playing through the game, I thought that could be what is happening with Sephiroth. I saved some screenshots where Cloud was like, what about how upset I am? Like, it's all about how upset you are. And he's like, why would I be upset? And I was like, oh man, he does not know. He's very upset. He's like, I'm actually happy, which is, I very much so doubt that.
I'm also curious as well, we can take it like, and I know you wanted to talk about this, but like Advent Children and our villains there.
Oh my gosh. The parts of Sephiroth, think about how differently all of their emotions are. Like, Kadaj is so big in their emotions, and Laz is more like the little wimpy, but like the kind of strong parts of him too. And thinking about how they themselves were thrust into this situation where it's like, all right, we need to find Mother, because we need to put everything back together for Brother to come back. And then it's like, wow, chaotic family dynamics at its best. All right, older brother's the best. Now let's it's super complicated and I understand that, but let's think about like chaotic family dynamics. You've got the oldest sibling who is like the star child to everyone, who everyone's talking about because he's a bit of a badass. It's 13 plus, I can say that. And then you're like, okay, so you gotta find Mom, because then Mom is going to help Big Brother come back because Big Brother's just better than you all are. And just, how does that feel to be like, okay, this is us, this is who we are. The concept that these three could potentially be talked out of what they're doing, I think it's kind of a null and void point. But to me, like watching all of them in their different personalities try to orchestrate something together and then ultimately end up bringing Sephiroth back at the end of Advent Children, it's almost kind of like man, I wish somebody would have intervened sooner.
I'm going to throw it out there. I really enjoyed Advent Children. I don't like what they did with Cloud, but Advent Children is a good film. There, I said it. Thank you, yes. Speaking of villains then, and again, like really granular, you can tell we like this a lot. The actual villain isn't really Sephiroth though, it's Jenova, right? Mm-hmm. So aliens. Any thoughts on that? Like instead of like it being him, and because he's in the crater right the whole time, it's actually Genova like controlling and manipulating everything. Like that's some pretty freaky stuff with the Genova cells and stuff. And actually, you could even argue Hojo is the actual villain because he started everything, and he gives scientists a bad rep, right? Like, any other thoughts on those
We
other
were just
villains?
talking about that. He just runs around like injecting people with Genova, saying it's cloning. I'm like, that's not how cloning works. Like someone's got to tell him like, at least a little bit about cloning. Yeah, I think that was something I was really struck by in this replay, that Genova is, I guess, well, I don't know enough about it, but it seems kind of like parasitic. It's something from outside of the planet, and I guess it said that when Genova enters the cells of the ancients, they turn into monsters, which has, definitely
really
a lot
granular.
happening in the plot.
Really, really granular. And I think that that translates to the geostigma, into Advent Children, all the way to a smile. Like all those things add up, right? And like again, like you get this bigger thing. As we sort of get towards the nether end of the panel, one of the things I'd like your thoughts on is the actual game ends with the end of civilization. Good or bad? No people left because it's just Red 13 and his puplings.
I mean, I guess you probably thought it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like Red.
Yeah. My boy survived. All good. Like, so like the fact that, and it's an open ending, it's there, it's interpretation, which is what makes it art, which what makes it beautiful. But like, what do we think of that as like the end point?
Well, I thought it was the end of Midgar. I don't know if it was the end of civilization, that it just was kind of like unrecoverable and they're all living somewhere happily in another place. That was my interpretation of the ending. And I guess Vincent is, this is very granular, immortal as a repercussion of being injected by, I believe, parts of Ultimate Weapon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so he and Red 13 hang out.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's lovely. They can hang out and talk about everybody.
They have like goth chat at like, on the way to a smile, like, we're gonna live forever. Like, yeah, I know, right? That sucks. Yeah. Any other thoughts on like that type of ending?
See, I almost went the other end with it. I was like, do we deserve to stay after what we did? I mean, it like just looking at just the overall themes of it. Look at how humans destroyed the planet, trying to search for this theoretical promised land. Like, look at what Shinra did. Look at that, the damage it did. Like, and at the end, I was just like, I don't know if they deserve to stay. Like, I mean, it just like I know that's a morbid thought, but I was thinking about it, and it's just like they destroyed everything. Like, is it a truly bad thing that they're gone? I don't know.
Yeah, I have to agree. That almost kind of was exactly how I felt. It's almost like, wow, oh my gosh, you've got so many people fighting over this very finite resource. And, even the people that are fighting for the good of it to make sure that the planet has it, they're potentially fighting a battle that's never going to be won. So it's almost as if, even if do they even deserve it? Were they just fighting for a few extra years? Was the planet ultimately going in this direction anyway, and then we just got to see the end of it?
Any other thoughts? No? Okay. So, I'd really like now to just sort of go through and get everyone's kind of final thoughts as we gear up towards the Q&A. Now again, please remember, question, ideally under 20 words. There's a microphone there. If the microphone is not accessible to you, please raise your hand. We have a mobile mic, so please begin to prepare your questions. Final thoughts, let's start down this way and then we'll go across.
So I think one thing that I did want to mention, as well as so we have each of these characters' trauma responses, but there's another side of research on trauma called terror management, and it's how communities respond to trauma en masse that they share. And I think Final Fantasy VII does that really well too. You see how all the different NPCs respond in different ways to the events. And remember, I think that they have a war right before the events of Final Fantasy VII, and then in Final Fantasy VII, obviously, there's a cataclysm, and so I think that that's really powerful and something that I haven't seen much in other games. So that's my closing thought. Oh, and it's very good.
It's very good.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I think we share that thought. I think just closing thoughts, Final Fantasy VII will always have a special place in our hearts, I think, because of the way it was so groundbreaking in the narrative and the character development and showing trauma and recovery and having an unexpected ending. And I think that's just something really special that we can all share and bond over and talk about even still now, which is great because I have 3 kids and I don't play too many games these days. So let's talk about my prime years in PlayStation days.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is let the game speak to you the way it needs to speak to you at the time. Whether it means something to you the first time you play it or the 100th time you play it, it could be a completely different response based on what's going on in your life. Let that open your heart to that. Like, I get a very different experience every single time based on what I'm currently going through and what I'm dealing with. And it allowed me to kind of just open my mind and think that, like, you know, I'm not always going to have the same experience. So just kind of be open to that. And, you know, if it's something like, you know, going back to your favorite game whenever you're feeling lost or when you're dealing with something, who knows, you might get something out of it. You might learn something about yourself, something about friends and that sort of thing too. So just keep an open mind, I guess.
I think that this game does a lovely job focusing on the trauma and recovery part. And even just like the life sucks and sometimes recovery part of it too, is that if you find a narrative that really speaks to you, share it with other people. I know a lot of people, you know, Final Fantasy, it's like, oh, well, the remake came out and we're still waiting for like parts 2 or 3 or 10 based on how this is going to turn out. But share it with them. Show them clips, you know, especially if you find a character that really speaks to you. That's what games are for, and Final Fantasy does a tremendous job at that as well, so embrace it.
Okay, now please pick our brains. I actually forgot like where geographically the mic is, so like
It's right there in the middle.
right there. Okay, excellent. I can't see it, so do please gravitate towards that area. As I say, if that is inaccessible to you, please just keep your hand raised. We have a mobile microphone, and then please just bring it on.
Go ahead.
Questions? Anything? Anyone want to defend the party then?
Oh, there's a question. There's a question.
Oh, sorry, you got a question?
Yes.
So, figure out how I want to. So, while yes, the main story's villain is sort of a combination of both Genova and Sephiroth, Cloud's story, which is one of many stories in Final Fantasy VII, his villain is Sephiroth. And the dichotomy of somebody who, through either escapism or actually getting over it, as he does with Tifa towards the end of the game, versus someone like Sephiroth who just seems to lean into the trauma. I just wondered what your thoughts on that were.
Like a compare and contrast, kind of?
Yeah, like the like how they use that dichotomy just to make Sephiroth like Cloud's villain.
Okay. Anyone fancy that?
So I guess it's kind of like, is Sephiroth a foil to the progression that Cloud goes through? It's such a complicated story because we also have Zack and what he goes through. What do you guys think as a foil to the Cloud narrative?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think it's not one-to-one, which I guess makes sense for something that is trauma-related, right? There's so many different reactions. But, you know, actually it is the closest because there is that alienation and Cloud isn't in touch with himself, and that's the same trauma response that Sephiroth has. Sadly, well, I was going to say Sephiroth doesn't have a support structure, but he kind of does. He has all the weird clones and Genova, right? He's got a toxic friend group, so it doesn't go as well. Yeah, so that's a good foil, I think. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you.
The mic's a little high
no.
for me. You were talking about how, when I think of Final Fantasy, I think of the music.
Yes.
And how
Yes.
connected it is to my emotional experience of all of the games. And Chris was talking about how that moment of Cloud rejoins and he says, okay, I'm ready to go, and then the music changes. So I would love to hear what your favorite Final Fantasy VII songs were.
We don't have enough time.
All of them.
Anyone? Cosmo Canyon slaps.
Cosmo
yeah.
Canyon, I think, is my favorite as well. Just the moment you walked into that whole area, the ship, it's literally my phone alarm. Cosmo Canyon, the orchestra version. By the way, go see the orchestra of Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's amazing.
I have.
I think there's a song called Ahead on Our Way, or On Our Way. That's the song that's, I think, the most calming to me that I listen to. And then my husband is always laughing because I do a lot of research writing, right? I do like a lot of manuscripts, and I'll be writing to like One Winged Angel, like come in and be like, is everything all right?
Like
here?
this? Like...
Just like blasting like One Winged Angel and like getting work done. But it helps. It's effective.
Cosmo Canyon. But that's a great point that you bring up about the music of Final Fantasy, because it's absolutely beautiful, and it absolutely supports the narrative storytelling.
I'm a ditto with the other three.
Yes.
We perhaps didn't give it like enough credit, but like the music and like the
Yeah.
comedic levity through all of this ties it together in a way that shouldn't
a whole
happen.
nother panel,
Yeah, I
too.
know.
Yeah.
Like, I know. You could do a panel on the jokes of Final Fantasy VII, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Music is such a powerful way that mental health, or just emotions are a big
yeah.
part of mental health.
Yep.
Hello.
Yes, hello. So I'd like to say thank you for acknowledging some of the side characters or other supporting characters who also have their own trauma and reactions to that to deal with. I was a little worried I wouldn't hear anything said about Barrett or Nadaki and their individual struggles. I'd like to know if any of you have any analysis or thoughts on some of the truly side supporting characters who clearly have issues that they have to work out or had not fully worked out. I'm talking Elmira.
Yeah, Elmira.
I'm
This guy Arsik.
Hmm?
This guy Arsik. the guy in the slum is like a famous typo. I'll see myself out. Sorry.
Sorry. So specifically, I'm thinking of Elmira and Dine, Shara, Sid's assistant, who clearly has, I would say, I guess you could call it survivor's guilt of sorts, based on how everything went down with the rocket launch, and to a lesser extent, since they're entirely optional, Wutai and the people there, and the after effects of the war. If any of you have ever provided or put any analysis into those characters and their experiences.
Side characters. Any thoughts?
I was gonna write a whole section on this part, and I do think, and I mean, if anyone's been in therapy, they've probably heard this. I think it's something to like kind of put a pin in and return to, because it deserves its own space and time, right? It's a very long conversation, but I agree that I think Dine, we just talked about Sephiroth as a foil to Cloud. Dine goes through the same events as Barrett and just really goes in the opposite direction, but at the same time, there's different components to it, right? He doesn't have the child with him, and that affects the trajectory that he goes on. I think that there's a lot that could be written about Professor Gast and Ilfana, I think is how you pronounce her name, Eris's mother. There's so much that could be written, as well as just like not even plot contingent characters, but NPCs. You also see their reactions throughout the course.
It feels very complicated to me. I'm sitting here with a lot of thoughts coming in my brain, but I appreciate that question because I think that's really important, because sometimes the really minor characters are showing us a lot of the real true emotions that we might not see from the main characters. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes, thank you.
The game is
you.
that good, right? The game is that good.
Oh my God, it is, yeah. That could be a whole separate panel on
I
its
agree.
own.
Yeah.
So wonderful panel. My question's for the entire panel. What character, if you think about from the first time you played the game to now, what character has your interpretation or appreciation of changed the most from the first time you played and now, and why?
That's a good question.
Ooh. I'll give them like a second. I'll be like, I think
Okay.
Vincent. Just because like I feel like I understood that kind of brooding nature a lot more. Like after that, I realized that was not offering you any more time.
I guess maybe Sid. I mean, I was a kid when I played the first time, and I just didn't connect to his plot. And now that I am a researcher who requires funding, I definitely connected in a different way to his plot. But in general, I think I just noticed so much. I noticed a lot in each playthrough. I did notice a lot about Yuffie and Wutai and their reactions to kind of becoming a tourist trap. I thought that there was so much going on there that really, and kind of everyone had a point, and they all had to come together and find a middle ground in that. So just a lot every time.
Well, now I want to say Sid, but I won't. I'm going to say Cloud, because when I first played through, I thought, oh, Cloud's just a broody teenager like me, and now I'm like, oh, Cloud has trauma. Cloud has trauma. So that definitely changed over time for me.
I would say Nanaki. And the reason why I say that is because he's just so adamant about hating his father and believing that they were abandoned. And then you just see the change and just the pride and everything that comes from that moment afterwards. Like, it completely reshaped how I saw that character, because, you know, we see him like, oh, he's like supposed to be about 15 or 16 in human years. He's just a kid, and like just going through that, like if I was in that situation, I probably would have reacted the exact same way. But I think his kind of growth is really interesting, and it definitely changed my opinion on him for sure.
Reno and Rude.
Oh.
I actually really didn't like them for the longest time, and then I think after replaying the game, watching Advent Children, the remake, I'm like, I actually really jive with these two. I mean, I don't like them at times, but man, are they fun.
I love Reno. Thank you.
Hey guys, so my question pertains to the analysis from an interesting part of the game, which can vary depending on what you say in the game, the date in Gold Saucer. So my thoughts I want to ask you guys about is like, A, who was your original character that you had to go out and that seen them all, what is like your analysis on either the one you got or each one? If you have a preferred one, say one too.
I guess I can jump in there. I think my obvious answer is pretty obvious.
Is it Yuffie? I thought it'd be Yuffie.
For those of you who may not be able to see, I'm cosplaying as a modern Aerith, but yes, she was my first choice. And every time I could have a positive interaction with her, I tried to, and I didn't know later that would affect that. And I think it just gave us a really vulnerable look at how she felt about Cloud, and I loved that whole moment, to be honest.
Aerith fan here, every time.
So I think probably by my answers, it's also obvious that Tifa is my favorite for the date, followed by, I did do all of them like back in the day as a kid, and I think Barrett was, I really liked the evolution of their friendship in Final Fantasy VII, so I think that's my second favorite.
I was Barrett because I really wanted him to stop being grumpy. I'm gonna be entirely honest. I was like, please be happy. Please
It was
like
such
me.
a good date with them, though. The bromance. I
You
loved
think
it.
it's awkward,
Yeah.
and then you actually go with it and he's like, oh, you know what, it's actually going all right.
And the best bit of that is where it's like, wait, so do you like Marlene? And Cloud's just like, what? Like, she's a child.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you guys talked a lot about the legacy of talking about grief and loss in Final Fantasy VII, which kind of, as you were talking about it, I realized 8, 9, and 10 also deal a lot with those themes as a result. So I was curious, which of the other Final Fantasies do you do this kind of analysis with, or do you think as deeply about, along with 7, if there's any in particular that comes
Should we
to
talk about Final Fantasy VI? Yeah.
mind? Yeah.
Oh,
That's
Fran, we could talk about 6 for a long time. 6 also has a lot to say, and also 10. In the past at PAX, we have done panels on 6 and 10. So you are right, these themes do resonate through different iterations of Final Fantasy, which I think is part of the magic of the storytelling, that they are so deep and that we can have these long, lengthy analyses about what's going on with the characters in between them.
Yeah, I think all of them. I'm percolating on your question a little bit. I think 9 definitely does show a lot of grief that happens across the plot, right? Especially after that scene with like the clouds and the exploding of the hometown. Yeah. And I was thinking of also the one, and I forget the number, but they're either going to become a crystal or, yes, 13. Yeah, and I think that that's like actually pretty horrifying, and I think that there could be a lot to be said about the real-time trauma of having a countdown before turning into a crystal or a monster.
Well, and 10's kind of a countdown. Well, Yuna's getting on her way to be sacrificed.
Exactly, yeah, 10 is, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely tragic, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We do have a few minutes left, so we're going to try and like lightning round it.
All right. Hopefully this one will be pretty quick. I want to know what your favorite interpersonal moment is with the cast.
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Interpersonal moments with the cast, like just the banter, side conversations, all of that. What's your favorite one?
I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to go to the movie. The whole thing with Vincent about phoning in, forgiveness, and then he shows up to the fight at the end, and he's like, I need to find I need to figure out where to buy a cell phone, or whatever he says. And I'm just like, that's still like, I don't know why I love that so much, but I'm like, perfect.
I'm going to skip because I'm going to think about mine a little bit longer.
I'm going to say the interactions in the live stream.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like on a serious note, the live stream. On a less serious note, the Let's Mosey.
Yeah.
And then Sid's like, you can't say that. You have to be serious. And I thought that was like a cute little like banter moment. Oh yeah, and then the speech in the high wind. I'm going to list things.
The whole game.
All of it.
All right, I think I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go to the remake, and I'm just going to say Reno and Rude. Helicopter.
Yep.
Thank you.
No one said Tifa and Cloud outside the Highwind. Wild. Sorry,
yeah,
your question.
That's a good point.
Hi. My thing is I just want to say that, like, after everything that's been said during the panel, how would you, like, summarize everything said for somebody who hasn't played Final Fantasy VII? Specifically, like, they've been spoiled with the story because the internet exists, and the fact that they may not appeal to the older gameplay, because it's the most complete version they have that can get the entire thing, unless they want to wait another 10 years for Part 2 for the remake. So just how would you summarize everything said to be like, hey, don't worry about that, how would you, like, play it for these reasons?
For
So
what
like
reason?
the selling point, essentially? Like how would you sell it?
It's kind of, yeah. Like, instead of gameplay or story, it'd be like, hey, this is what you get out of it. Because obviously you guys have, like, personal, of, like, why do you enjoy this? So, like, for those reasons, what would be the selling point?
I'm not concise. I feel like this is your fault.
It's really fun. Like, and it's really good. Like,
I mean, I would also say too, Final Fantasy has had, what, 15 games? And it's always 6 and 7. They're always, people will fight to the death for 6 or 7. So I think that speaks to the power of this particular iteration.
And I think it's up to people, right? If they want to play it or not, that's up to them. But I would try to see what they're interested in, right? And then connect it to that. And I do think like there is a cultural component, right? Like what we were just talking about, like to have that touchstone. I'd also say that there are absolutely parts of it that are very clunky playing through. There are quite long summons and things like that, but you can play it at 3 times the speed, and that does really help at points. So, and there's strategy guides out there that make it playable.
and we are going to have to end there. We'll be out in the hall for more talky times. But please join me with a massive roar for thanking all of my panelists.